Hey, this is Mohal Joshi from Los Angeles, California. I follow Indian foreign policy and defense with a special focus on Asia. You can follow me on Twitter at Mohal Joshi.
Hey, this is Kishore Narayan from Bengaluru in India. I am an international relations expert specializing in global security, conflict resolution, and international negotiation. My focus areas include peace building and digital diplomacy. You can find me on Twitter at Veggie Diplomat. Hello, and welcome to episode 35 of India Rising Strategic Affairs Conversations with Mohal and Kishore, a show in which we analyze whatever happens around the world and their impact on India. Before we begin with today's episode, we just hope that our friends in Afghanistan are safe during these troubled times. So what we've seen in the recent past, in the past fortnight or so, is the dramatic collapse or dramatic fall of Kabul in Afghanistan. While it was kind of inevitable that the Taliban would launch an offensive to reclaim control once the NATO-led, US-led NATO forces would leave Afghanistan, it was kind of unexpected that the fall of Kabul would be so dramatic and so quick. In fact, this pretty much was a bloodless surrender or a bloodless victory for Taliban against the Afghan National Forces. So one thing that we need to keep in mind is that Taliban already was controlling roughly around 30% territory even before the US had announced a troop pullout. So again, it's kind of a dicey situation because the US controlled very few pockets like the Bagram Air Base, like the Kabul airport, and probably the elite corridors in Kabul. But overall, the Afghan national government was still in charge of pretty much the remaining part of the country. And some hinterlands was where Taliban was regrouping and was ensuring that they were preparing for the final offensive. So eventually, now that Taliban are now in control of pretty much the whole country, except for a few minor pockets here and there, the question that we need to think about or we need answers for is, are Taliban now smarter than 25 years ago? Earlier, they were ready for bloody battles, long drawn out bloody battles. This time, they seem to have chosen the path of least resistance. I mean, being out of power seems to have taught them quite a few lessons. So, what they've done is they've kind of tied up with powerful tribal leaders, including tribal leaders from the northern areas, which was never under their control between 1996 to 2001. So that way, Taliban ensured that they won't have much resistance during their final offensive or during their final attack on the major cities of Afghanistan. So now, while doing so in a spectacular fashion, Taliban now suddenly have access to supplies of firepower, arms, ammunition, supplies, so on and so forth. And even so, that Taliban now pretty much controls the entire Afghan Air Force with almost 11 military bases. So that's the kind of spectacular gains that Taliban have had in the recent fortnight, which has stunned the world pretty much. So yeah, Mohal, you want to kind of elaborate on how these things gained attraction and how it all happened?
Yeah, so what we have noticed is that the resistance to the Taliban has pretty much melted away.
Mm-hmm.
Post the end of the NATO mission in December 2014, what we saw that was that the um, the US forces were mostly confined to their bases. So Taliban, as you said, right, that control a large part of their country. And as per some reports, they already have seen the pictures that they control a lot of the US hardware, which they didn't have access to. Modern military equipment they didn't have access to around 20 years ago, since they were last in power. And like as per some estimates, like they also have control up to $80 billion of US hardware, which I mean could easily fall into now. I mean Taliban wouldn't want to relinquish control, but some of it could easily fall back into Pakistani hands across the border, or even be exported to China for reverse engineering some of the high-end technology. Though most of the high-end technology was removed, but is obviously going to, I mean, if you can just remember like 20 years ago, like there were so many Stinger missiles that were left over from the opposition to the Russian invasion of Afghanistan that, I mean, it was like funny. I was reading somewhere that they were offering up to like a few thousand, I mean, like more than $10,000 for each Stinger recovered, because they didn't want after the fall of Afghanistan to for those same Stinger missiles to be used against the NATO forces. So anyways, yeah, I mean the resistance was quick and I mean the resistance was not much there. I mean it was a swift victory for the Taliban as they took over large parts of the country. I think in like probably like under 2 weeks or something, they swept across the entire
Pretty much.
the,
Correct.
the- yeah, the remaining part of it. Was like I think there were estimates ranging all the way from 6 months to a year
A
or
year.
maybe 2 years. Because I mean, see, last time around, even with no NATO forces around, I mean, no US forces around, it took them in 96, sorry, between 94 to 96, it took them, I think, 2 years, right, Kishore,
Hmm.
for them to depose Najibullah from power. So this time it has been, I mean, nobody expected this. I think that's why we saw the chaotic scenes in Kabul where a lot of the, especially the Western powers, have not been able to evacuate their people. I mean, but it's also a failure of intelligence for sure, especially in the
Definitely.
US side. That
Definitely.
I mean, you have to plan for a variety of scenarios. I mean, and you have to give assign a probability. You never just say, okay, this is the scenario and this is going to happen.
Hmm.
So a lack of planning has been like very. I mean, it's in shambles, the withdrawal at this point. So hopefully, like everybody's going to withdraw. Now, coming to the scenes on the ground, obviously they are very heart wrenching. A lot of people have been stuck. People want to flee, and the airport has been barricaded, and they are not able to get onto flights to escape. I mean, Taliban could be preventing a lot of the Afghans from leaving. I mean, we don't know, the details are hazy due to the fog of war. I mean, not actually a war, but the fog of uncertainty. The US has also has like apparently like 10,000 people stuck behind the Taliban lines. So I mean, it is like I mean, we'll have to wait and watch to see how it unfolds over the next few days. Hopefully, it doesn't uh, descend into anything more worse than I mean what it is right now.
Hmm.
So coming on to the optical scene, so what we have seen, the Taliban has been devoid of any bloodshed. I mean, if you just compare this to the last time around when they captured Afghanistan in 1996, if I will, sorry, Kabul in 1996, they took the president Najibullah, who wasn't able to flee, and I believe like he was tortured and his body was hung from a light post.
Right.
So I mean, it was a very bloody end to that part of the civil war in '96. So compared to that, if you contrast the scenes to today, I mean, it's been like pretty. I mean, there have been some reports of people being beaten up or like killed in the hinterlands,
Hmm.
but in the Kabul, it's been pretty. I think because of the glare of the world's media, Taliban is not doing anything right now. The real test of their image would be like once the everybody's been evacuated safely and people have left, then what happens then? Because you they could be like just trying to portray a more better image of themselves just to make sure that they get the international recognition which they need in the coming days. So, I
Right.
mean, Taliban, as some people have said, they are projecting a more conscious image of the last time. I mean, it could be like they have been either been coached, I mean, which is kind of hard to see, like knowing the history of Taliban, or they've been told to do good PR to gain more legitimacy. I mean, somebody even remarked that many of their leaders have stayed in exile outside the Afghanistan, like in a way they had more exposure to the world view, like staying in, let's say, places like Pakistan or Qatar. And I think they have been maybe the ISI handlers or someone has told them, like, not to do anything for now. I mean, many commentators have been saying, oh, this is Taliban 2.0, which is different from 1.0, but I would reserve my judgment until like a larger amount of time has passed on.
Right.
So,
Right. Right.
so I mean, in the other part is like that in many areas. I mean, one of the things is like, why did uh, the resistance melt away so quickly? So some theories have been put forward, and some of them do make sense that in many areas the Afghan forces like were riddled with corruption and also human right violations, and the U.S. forces or the foreign forces were seen as protectors of the Afghan security forces. So the people had no love lost for the Afghan security forces. So many people were uh, I mean, the people might say, "Oh, the Taliban is a more brutal regime and dictatorial regime. Like, why would they support it?" But that could be one of the reasons that uh, this. I think that this was an issue right from 2001 that there were always complaints against the Karzai government and the Ghani government that they couldn't control the corruption. And this was like a big dichotomy, like where the Afghanis would always blame the the issues in Afghanistan, like because the militant benefactors stayed in across the border in Pakistan, while the U.S. folks would always say no, it's not. They're just making an excuse for not running the government well, and a lot of the corruption and the abuses. I mean, a lot of the money being filled in the coffers of some of the corrupt officials. Obviously, all of them were not corrupt. There were many honest, upstanding officials working for the betterment of Afghanistan. I mean, if you think Afghanistan, I think if I look at the numbers correctly, the GDP has doubled in the last 20 years, which is quite a remarkable achievement. But I
Hmm.
mean, those bad apples did create a negative image of the government. There was not a lot of trust in the government. Plus, there is always that the tribalism that exists in Afghanistan since ages, where various factions. I mean, also the various warlords. I mean, they are. I mean, as we call them in India, like the Bahubalis in certain areas, they would I mean, they would not be very endeared to many of the people. So people might just want a change in the regime and might even favor a Taliban regime, which is like more brutal and more oppressive, but at least it frees them from the corruption and the
Correct,
abuses
correct.
that they have seen.
Also, I mean, the overall general administrative inefficiency that was seen.
Mm-hmm,
Uh,
mm-hmm,
whatever work needed to be done by the government, by the administration,
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
everything used to happen at its own sweet pace, and that is what
Mm-hmm.
kind of angered the people even more.
Yeah, I mean, see, the thing is like many of these remote areas, like if the government doesn't take, as you say, swift action, it
Hmm.
just creates more anger towards the government, and people lose confidence in the government. I mean, someone might say like, hey, if like person X can't deliver better than person Y, then why not just go back to person Y? I mean, also like Taliban, which is sort of instant justice kind of system, which I'm not endorsing by any way, shape, or form. Like they would deliver justice. Okay, if person X has been wronged by person Y, I mean a person A by B, then they would just deliver instant justice, which might be brutal and like not the right way. I mean, it's not the right way to deliver justice, but people saw like instantly like they could get justice in the and also like the corruption. Obviously, there used to be even the Taliban had like money extortion and stuff, but they just saw like a better life under Taliban, which might be paradoxical in the
Hmm.
worldview of many people, but I just saw that it might not be the worst thing. I mean, if I say it would be just like choosing the better of the two
Better
evils
of,
at this point.
yeah, yeah,
So I
yeah.
think that's why this is one point I think is not being discussed enough. Like people like didn't have high regard for the current government. So that's why I mean, and also if you remember, like in 20 years apart, we have seen that two coalitions have swept to power within matter of weeks, right? In 2001, the Taliban simply melted away. And in the 2021, 20 years later, the opposite has happened. The Taliban swept and the other. So I think many of the warlords are also not very keen on fighting per se. I mean, they say which way the wind is blowing, and they would like to go sit with the majority faction. I mean, I'm not saying they're like a weather vanes, but like they see where the gains are to be had, and they would simply switch sides rather than stay and fight a brutal civil war. I mean, they have been
Correct.
anyways fighting for over 40 years of brutal civil war. So, okay, if side X is winning, I'll just go with side X and not like bother to be in the way of the resistance, So, I mean,
Also,
alliances can shift very quickly. I mean, you just look at like Hekmatyar. Like, I mean, I don't know how many times he has switched sides in the in the last 40 years. So yeah, I mean, it's not surprising. Like maybe there might be like people like the Panjiris, like the Amruna Saleh and Masood,
Ahmad
like
Masood, yeah.
who might always be on one side, but many folks. And I think that's why I think Karzai was airdropped into Afghanistan in
Mm,
2001 to negotiate with the Pashto tribes, that they wanted him to negotiate so that, and I think he was able to convince a lot of them to come over sooner rather than later and just reduce the duration of the war 20 years ago.
mm. Also, the other thing to remember is
Hmm.
Taliban was anyway in control of 25, 30, 35% of the territory.
Hmm.
And Taliban used to tom about how they are trying to bring in social justice and also administrative efficiency in their pockets of influence. So that also
Hmm.
would have kind of acted in their favor, especially for the people
Hmm.
who were under the national government's
Hmm.
regime. So obviously they would have thought, well, Taliban isn't that bad after all. And
Hmm.
as you said, they are the lesser among the two
Yeah,
evils,
yeah,
which is kind of, again, sad to see that
yeah.
Taliban trumping the national
Hmm.
government in this
Hmm.
regard.
Yeah. So, Kishore, I think we talked briefly with all the various actors in this Afghanistan tussle.
Hmm.
So, you want to like elaborate on the power struggles within Afghanistan?
Yeah, I think it's important that we realize that Afghanistan, like any country at war, has multiple power centers. So even now that we have even now that we have a decisive victory for the Taliban, we still are not sure that this will things will stay this way. So we need to realize that the last may not be written about the overall offensive that the Taliban did. So again, things are like remember we had the Northern Alliance even back then in 1994 to 96, 97, and they were successful in keeping Taliban at bay, and Taliban never got to a position where they could control the extreme northern areas. The Northern Alliance was kind of a loose amalgamation of Tajik ethnic tribal leaders, and they kind of had ganged up against Taliban, and they were kind of able to keep them at bay. So now the thing is, now even now, a new avatar of Northern Alliance has taken shape. We have Amrullah Saleh, who happens to be the first vice president of Afghanistan under President Ghani. And also we have Ahmad Masood, whom you spoke about just now. He is the son of the legendary resistance leader Ahmad Shah Masood. So needs to be seen if these two can continue to put forth more and more resistance to the Taliban while they are holed up in the Panjshir Valley. Now, on the other hand, Taliban might also see this as that niggle that they might want to get rid of completely. Northern Alliance was a sore um player for them last time around, so they would want to ensure that Northern Alliance does not gain any traction in the near future. So yeah, Amrullah Saleh has anyway openly claimed that we will lead a fight back, we will lead a resistance against Taliban. Needs to be seen how things pan out. But then the interesting factor is what happens from from an international dimension, from an international perspective, and how do outside players like let's say India or Russia or even the US, how do they look at this kind of a northern alliance, or even for example President Ashraf Ghani. Now what will happen if he uh, claims himself to be president in exile of the erstwhile national government, and what if he tells that there was never a handover of power and he is the true leader of Afghanistan still. So again, although I'm pretty sure that internationally Ashraf Ghani might not gain much traction, but on the other hand, Northern Alliance might actually uh, get some underhand or off the radar kind of assistance. After all, Amrullah Saleh has Ahmad Masood has openly asked the Americans to supply them arms and ammunition so that they can continue leading their fight back. Now, as part of the Taliban movement itself, we need to understand who are the power players within Taliban. And there itself, we have a power struggle which is kind of looming upon them. So we all know that Mullah Omar was the founder of the Taliban movement. Now, in the recent past, Taliban movement has been spearheaded by Haibatullah Akhundzada. He, in all probability, might be the supreme leader of the Taliban in charge of Afghanistan. However, it is to be noted that he has yet to be seen in public anywhere in the past few months at least. Haibatullah Akhundzada himself, in fact, Mohal, I just saw one article somewhere today telling that Akhundzada himself might be diagnosed with COVID. So we have not
I
we have not.
mean, if you remember that previous leader, I believe, who was like dead in 2013, didn't acknowledge for 2 more years. Mullah Omar, right?
Yeah, the one
The
he,
erstwhile leader of Taliban. Like, I mean, he was dead, and even the US security. I
correct.
mean, intelligence agencies couldn't pick it up, though NDS, the security agency of Afghanistan, did mention like quite a few times, but like nobody believed it. And I think in 2015 they finally acknowledged that he was dead.
Finally,
So the question is like, is he not well, as you say, or is he like has passed away and they don't want to acknowledge it? Like, I mean, so like a lot of mysteries with
yeah,
Afghanistan to be
yeah,
solved in
yeah,
the coming
yeah.
days.
Anyway, so Akhundzada himself has three deputies. One of them is Mullah Baradar, who has now traveled from Doha to Kabul, and this is everywhere in the news right now. And the other deputy is Maulavi Yaqub, who is the actual son of Mullah Omar. And the third person is Sirajuddin Haqqani, who is also a deputy leader of Taliban. So you have three deputies. And of the three deputies, it is highly probable, everyone thinks, that Mullah Baradar might be the new president of Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. So
And I think he's
again,
already in Kabul, right?
he is
He's
already in
already reached
Kabul.
in
Yeah,
Kabul.
exactly. So he has now reached Kabul to start off with talks to establish a new Taliban government. So again, we don't know what is the power equation between the three deputies of Akhundzada. So again, that is something that only time can answer. Um, anyway, the other thing is there was a report that the Afghan economy itself might shrink by up to 20% after the Taliban takeover, which means that Taliban itself might not have deep coffers to access to rebuild the economy or to run the country or anything that they want to do with it. So I think that way a shrinking economy might also add a new challenge or a new dimension to the existing challenge for Taliban when they actually start ruling the country. Now, along with all this, it's quite obvious now that the takeover of Afghanistan itself was an easy part for the Taliban, although it ended up becoming as easy as it came out to be. But going forward, a global recognition for themselves, winning over all domestic challengers, as we said, Northern Alliance or Ashraf Ghani or whoever, and also establishing friendly diplomatic ties with immediate neighbors like Iran, Pakistan, Russia, China. I think these are the next set of major challenges for Taliban, and this is where the umpteen power struggles would kind of loop out in all glory within Afghanistan. Mohan?
Yeah, so I think let me expand on the couple of the challenges. So see, like running a nation is like vastly different from running like guerrilla campaign, which I've been doing for the past 2 decades.
Correct.
Now, with international sanctions probably coming, I mean the Western powers won't do until all the citizens are out. So don't expect anything else till like probably end of August or early September. I mean, as per estimates, the budget was somewhere between 5 to 6 billion just to run the country, even with all these inefficiencies that we just highlighted. So now, I mean, Taliban used to get its money by drug running and extortion. I mean, but they can't be enough funds to cover the country, especially when you want to develop the country at a fast pace to lift the people out of poverty and give them a better life. So the revenue stream, probably with a lot of people running away, a lot of the businesses not willing to invest, is going to dry up. So this is going to create more pressure on the debt situation. And I mean, who's going to money? I mean, compare this to the 90s when Taliban, I mean, was recognized only by three countries like Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, and UAE. At that time, like I mean, Saudi Arabia and UAE were the pretty much the benefactors, the financial benefactors of Taliban. I mean, obviously Pakistan to a certain extent. Now, who will be funding them this time, or is the or the $1 billion question? I would say. I mean, I don't think this time, Kishore, correct me if I'm wrong. Saudi Arabia and UAE have made lot of vocal statements in their support. Am I right?
Them not at all. I mean,
Yeah.
very
So
muted statements.
yeah. So I mean, if the money is not going to flow from the Gulf countries, maybe Qatar might give them some money because of their sympathies. But if they are struggling, I mean, Saudi Arabia, UAE, let's say they cut off their funds to a large extent, maybe they might give some humanitarian aid here and there. Also,
Mhm.
Pakistan, as you know, is struggling economically, especially
Themselves.
after the FATF sanctions. So then,
Correct.
who is going to give them the money? I mean, how are they going to run the country? I mean, so coming to one of the points why the resistance melted away. So this is, I think, multiple sources have confirmed that many Afghan employees and soldiers were not paid for a very long time. In some cases, as long as 6 months. So this is one of the many factors. I mean, we did highlight a few factors of people not being happy with the government, but this is also like if people are not paid salaries, there is a high chance that they might just defect to the other side. So the question is, can the Taliban now in power pay those salaries, backdated salaries, and going forward? Because if not, then these people could might as well switch back again, say like, oh, you know what? Like those people are not paid the salaries, but maybe my life is not any better under the Taliban government. Then I might just go back to supporting the old government. Though the old government taking over militarily seems like not very possible right now. But what I mean to say is that the dissatisfaction of not getting paid salaries with the Ghani government, and if it's continuing the Taliban, if they don't have the resources and the funds, I mean, I don't know how. And as you say, like if the 20% the economy shrinks, then there's no revenue. I mean, it is going to be very hard to pay these people. So there could just be more unrest and more civil war within the government, because if some people don't get paid, and they could just be totally unhappy and they could pick up arms against, let's say, the Taliban.
Yeah. In
Kishore?
fact, I was listening to a BBC news about 20, 25 days ago, when the BBC correspondent was telling that the Afghan National Army soldiers, wherever they were, they didn't have drinking water, and drinking water had to be airlifted and dropped to
Mhm.
the soldiers. Forget arms, ammunition, they didn't even have drinking water. So how can you expect these soldiers to put up a spirited fight against Taliban when their immediate needs themselves are not met? So yeah, I think that's the kind of path that led to this kind of a situation that we are in, and agree that the future is not going to be a bed of roses for the
Mhm.
Taliban. Yep.
Yeah.
So I think we have elaborated on the challenges quite extensively. I think we'll also try to look at it from a global perspective. We'll try to understand how the outside nations are looking at it within. So I think one thing that we need to understand is in terms of the recognition for the Taliban administration itself, and even institutions like the United Nations will have to pitch in and will have to come out clear on what their role will be on whether they really want to recognize Taliban or not. So things like the P5 discussions or the Security Council discussions initiated by P5 will all come into limelight, and there will be deliberations on whether the terrorist tag that is on the Taliban right now, that whether that needs to be removed at all. I read somewhere that the US never marked Taliban as terrorists, right? Is that right? They only marked the Al Qaeda as terrorists. but never Taliban.
No, I think they did. I mean, I have to look it up, but they did sanction them heavily, you know.
Okay, okay, okay. In any case, again,
But they might have put a. I mean, I have to look it up. I can't recall it correctly here right now.
okay, okay, no worries. So I think there will be deliberations on removing the terrorist label, and that'll form the crux of the diplomatic back-channel talks. But more importantly, the other immediate need will be a global refugee policy for the Afghans who are trying to flee from Afghanistan. United Nations itself has estimated that nearly 400,000 Afghans, or 4 lakh Afghans, have already been forced to flee their homes since the start of the year. So this is actually indicative of internally displaced people as well. And in addition, you will also have contractors and other Afghans who worked for NATO or US troops or Indian companies or whoever, and they would want to get out of Afghanistan right now to avoid being targeted by Taliban. Although Taliban is claiming that they will not do revenge politics. So I think there will be a beeline of people heading out, and
I
that
think
is
even in Europe, like there's a lot of concern. So after the Syria civil war, there was a stream of refugees which headed to Europe, and I think it created a lot of domestic turmoil in terms of internal
correct,
politics,
correct,
with
right.
a lot of opposition to more refugees flooding the Europe, which created uh,
Yeah,
fears of demographic change.
right. In fact,
And
that shifted the whole narrative, the political narrative in Europe to more right-wing
yeah, yeah.
political
So the
parties
same,
gaining ground.
yeah. So the same concern is now that if you have a new stream of refugees flooding Europe, so what will be the not only the geopolitical implications but also the domestic implications? So a lot of people are opposed. I think
Correct.
many are okay with giving refuge to folks who have worked with NATO forces over the past 20 years, like highly educated people or like people who have been working as translators or doctors or engineers, but uh, they are there's a lot of resistance to giving more, I mean, allowing more refugees to come in, like via illegal immigration.
Right. So I think globally that will be the question for which there will be lot of deliberations and even diplomatic back channel talks.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
yeah, Mohal, you want to look at the other players within the region?
yeah. So now, Kishore, let's look at the various angles, like the immediate neighbors, like so. The Pakistan, Russia, and China.
Hmm.
So let's start with Pakistan. Now, in some circles in Pakistan, there's been a lot of celebration that, oh, we have been able to get US out of Afghanistan. I mean, I think it was their former ISI chief Hamid Gul who said in 2014 famously that we were able to, with Pakistan's help, we were able to defeat Russia in Afghanistan in the 70s and I mean the 80s.
Hmm.
And in this decade, I mean, this is like 7 years ago from today, that
Hmm.
oh, it will be written in history that oh, in like we were able to displace US from, I'm just paraphrasing it badly, sorry, like we were able to get rid of US from Afghanistan with the help of United States. So they have been like a there's a lot of duplicity in their cooperation
Hmm.
with Pakistan. I mean, so uh, Imran Khan, like, I mean, I think on the day that Kabul fell, he said like, oh, they have been Afghanistan has been freed from the shackles of slavery, which was like a truly head scratching moment for a head of state to say something as bizarre as this. I mean, like,
Especially on the
what do you
very
mean?
same
Like,
day. Yeah.
yeah, I mean, like, I mean, they were not like, there's not slavery. Okay, maybe things were not rosy in Afghanistan, but there was no like slavery. Like they were like subjugated under some harsh regime. I mean, there was some amount of freedom and liberty in Afghanistan. Anyways, keeping aside the maddening comments from like Imran Khan, so like I mean, there must be a lot of cheering within the ISI that they were able to achieve a friendly regime in Kabul. But I mean, what happens to the so-called? I'm using the Pakistani word, the bad Taliban, like the
Tehrik-e
Taliban
Taliban,
Pakistan.
Pakistan. Yeah,
Like, I
TTP.
mean, will they join the ranks with Taliban? I mean, and across the border and start attacking the Pakistani establishment itself. I mean, there have been reports that TTP soldiers have been freed from Afghanistan prison. So, I mean, they could easily be joining the fight inside Pakistan. There's a potential to create a lot of chaos inside Pakistan. I mean, there's also this video that's been floating on social media, that the videos of the Taliban at the Angurada checkpost between South Waziristan in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa and I think it's the Paktika province in Afghanistan. Sorry, I might have butchered the name. They were like taunting the Pakistani soldiers, like, I mean, you know, at the border, like the Afghanis that, oh, we are coming for you next. I mean, which is kind of scary. I mean, if you think of the Pakistanis, because this is immediately going to spill over. So, I mean, the celebrations could be happening in Pakistan, but they have to be also cognizant of the fact that this is going to blow over back into Pakistan. To what extent? I mean, nobody knows at this. I mean, after all, like Hillary Clinton, I think a decade ago famously said that you can't keep snakes in your background and expect them to only bite your neighbors. Eventually, all those snakes are going to turn on whoever is, like, you know, keeping them, you know. So, I mean, the Pakistani forces might seem that, okay, we have achieved that fabled strategic depth. I mean, that was like a crazy term to think. I mean, they just didn't want to be encircled. I think that was a better term, but they have achieved their fabled strategic depth with installing a pro-Pakistan regime in Kabul. But what happens next? I mean, will they create in mischief in India? Obviously, I mean, they could be now saying, oh, one of our sites is secured. I mean, assuming TTP doesn't do a lot of damage, we will go and, you know, create a mess with India. I mean, Pakistan has been known to create mischief from time to time. I mean, the LOC has been quiet, so now it could warm up, obviously.
Pretty much. Yeah.
So, Kishore, you want to cover the Russian angle now?
Yeah, I think so. So that's about the way Pakistan looks at things. Now, in terms of Russia, they, again, like everybody else, were keenly watching the situation. And they are kind of open to establishing friendship with Taliban to begin with, and slowly probably have formal ties. However, this led to quite a bit of, this led to raise the eyebrows. And hold on, why is Russia so falling head over heels, trying to establish ties with Taliban? And I saw an article where the Russian envoy to India clarified that Russia's hurried attempt to establish ties with the Taliban, uh, he justified, saying that he is not. He said that the Taliban should not be judged not only on their commitments but rather on their real actions to ensure law and order, fundamental freedoms, and human rights in their country. So I think people are not, countries are not against Taliban per se right now. They understand that Taliban is the far more powerful and the more established player within Afghanistan, and they don't mind dealing with Taliban right now. But I think these countries do understand that Taliban itself cannot be trusted right away, and they would want to take it slowly, try to understand and see how Taliban will stand up to their claims of of having become a moderate power. So I think that was an interesting statement by the Russian ambassador to India. But we also need to understand that the last time Taliban was in power, there was some follower of terrorism to the neighboring CIS republics like Tajikistan and Uzbekistan. And this time around, all these republics will be very, very keen to avoid such a repeat of events. So even Russia, for that matter, will be watching this carefully and ensure that Taliban continues to behave rather than wag its tail. Mohan?
Yeah, I think the threat would not be from, I guess, somebody like a Taliban itself, but like other groups operating within. I think this is a presence of Islamic State within.
IS in Khorasan, yeah.
Yeah, in Afghanistan, I mean. So there could be like some spillover from those groups potentially. I mean, they already have. I mean, the Chechen trouble has been pretty much mitigated in Russia for the time being, but they don't want any new, let's say, strain of terrorism emanating from Afghanistan, which creates trouble in Chechnya or even in the neighboring CIS republics like Tajikistan and Uzbekistan.
Yep. Okay, so now you want to switch over to China?
Yeah. So the other player in the name, major player in the neighborhood is China. I mean, China does have a small contiguous border with Xinjiang. I mean, of Xinjiang with the Wakhan corridor of
Mhm.
Afghanistan. So they have a contiguous land border with Afghanistan. So they have some concern. Like, I mean, China basically has been warming up to Taliban over the last few years. So because yes, I would say like three principal aims in addition to the one aim of getting US out of the region and establishing its influence in the region, as we say, like, because it might consider like all of Asia as its own backyard and would want US out of it. So anyways, the three principal aims of China are basically no support from Afghanistan of any group, including the ETIM, the East Turkestan Islamic Movement, to the Uyghurs in Xinjiang who are resisting Chinese dominance. So they have had issues of terrorism and insurgency in Xinjiang, so they don't want any support coming over the border. The other is the access to the rare earths bonanza, which is inside Afghanistan, which have been, as per some reports, valued as up to as high as 1 trillion. Though I don't think anybody has successfully mined them, so this is the question to be answered later on. And also expanding the BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, to expand connectivity towards through Afghanistan to Central Asia. I mean, they could connect towards, let's say, Iran, and then uh, on and forward to other nations in the Middle East. So these are the three Chinese principal aims. I mean, China has already announced that they are having open to having friendly relations with the Taliban. I think last month in July, Chinese Foreign Minister Yang Li met with the Taliban delegation. He hosted a Taliban delegation,
Mhm. Yeah.
and I think like they made some statements that they're open to having good relations, and I think they sort of got an implicit agreement with the Taliban that they won't allow their lands to be used for creating trouble in Xinjiang.
Xinjiang. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So now so that's the Chinese angle. But on the investment side, I mean, many Chinese experts in the last few days have said that they remain skeptical that Taliban has changed much. They advocate actually that Beijing should be more cautious and see, like, how they proceed, because some of these investments, I mean, they will also come with concerns of security. I mean, though the Chinese companies tolerance for security issues would be lower than Western companies who would be really reluctant in absence of any security guarantees by Taliban. But I mean, you can just see one in like neighboring Pakistan. I mean, from time to time, they do have attacks, even though like the Pakistani military is firmly in control most of the areas.
Mm-hmm.
There are like attacks on Chinese engineers and workers, So, I mean, it brings a lot of questions. Like, does Taliban guarantee security? I mean, because Taliban might not have full control in a lot of areas. I mean, there could be different warlords who might be battling for supremacy. Or does China put boots on the ground to secure their engineering projects, which will also be another quagmire? I mean, because we just had like this with like Graveyard of Empires comment, like, that a lot of people have put boots on the ground and nobody has come out really well. So would China, to secure their engineering projects, put boots on the ground or rely on Taliban for security? So, uh, I mean, a lot of open questions, but I think like even China is like a bit hesitant for the engineering projects to
Mm-hmm.
for time being,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
and moving closer to the South China Sea. I mean, China has been started threatening Taiwan by saying that you cannot rely on US for support, So they have been also meeting, like trying to get their shot in, saying like, oh, you know what, like Taiwan, you can't rely on, and you better become close to us.
Yeah, yeah. I think that again was an off-the-cuff remark, but a very pointed remark at the right time. China obviously is a master in coming out with such statements at the right time. They
Mhm.
just utilized the
But
moment to threaten Taiwan,
yeah, yeah,
Taiwan once
but
again.
I think, see, like one of the reasons for the withdrawal, I mean, I'm getting a little bit off point here with the China angle, that the US saw that China is their pretty much their main strategic competitor. I mean, in
Yeah.
this new Cold War 2.0, whatever you want to call it,
Mm.
I mean, their main aim is to put make sure that China doesn't rise and create more trouble for them. Taiwan is of strategic importance to them, they will come to the defense of Taiwan. Now, how soon Taiwan falls and all that is like an open question. Nobody knows, or if China even attempts an invasion of Taiwan. The question is like, I think US saw that this wars in the Middle East, like they were sapping up a lot of these resources and also the money and also the debt is uh, on an ever increasing scale. So they cannot sustain. So they had to pick and choose their battle. So I think they are saying, okay, we will take whatever the bad comes with withdrawing from Afghanistan in terms of maybe there's some uptick in terrorism and stuff, but we want to focus on China. I mean, China did grow under the radar. I mean, this war on terror has gone on for like now, what, 20 years, and China did use that time to grow strategically under the radar. Now the US is just shifting its focus. Like, after 9/11, they shifted, there was too much focus on the Cold War with Russia, right? So they shifted their focus to 9/11. So this could be another moment in history, like where maybe US shifts its focus from the war on terror to now China. So I think some of the statements like that, oh, that Taiwan is going to be screwed over completely. I mean, I still have my doubts that I think the focus is more on China now and making sure that China doesn't advance anywhere else in the region. So some of those commentary, I don't completely agree that this is like trouble time. Like people using that, okay, using the Afghanistan example to say, oh, this means that US cannot be relied upon. Obviously, I mean, US could tomorrow say, okay, China is now my friend and like, completely abandon some of its allies. But I don't think that happening anytime soon, but it's like kind of overblown.
That gives us a perfect segue to look at the US angle.
Mhm.
So yeah, let's look at that, Mohan. So we need to understand what made the US get into a war with the Taliban, come over to Afghanistan in first place. So obviously after 9/11, the primary demands by the US government was give Bin Laden to us and all the other Al Qaeda leadership and troops, stop all terror activities emanating out of the Afghan soil, free all jailed US citizens, and also open up your lands for inspection to their satisfaction. So I think that was the list of primary demands. Now, obviously, we all know that the Taliban did not listen to them, and eventually the war happened. The Al Qaeda were kind of routed. They ran helter skelter. Taliban themselves ran helter skelter. So we kind of know all that. Now, amidst all this, there was a huge debate politically, domestically within the US, wherein a lot of debate happened on whether there should be a troop drawdown or increase in troops, so on and so forth. And President Joe Biden, even last week, on the day when Kabul fell, he kind of explicitly mentioned that he disagreed with the increase in troops in 2012 when he was the deputy for President Obama. So I think that was a telling statement coming from President Joe Biden, telling that he
Mhm.
disagreed with his senior.
True, sir.
Yeah, 8 9 years ago. So yeah, again in that statement, Joe Biden came up with rather disappointing statements, or rather uh, troubling statements, telling our job was never nation building. This led to massive disappointment. I mean, questions like, if bringing peace and democracy were never their objective, then why the hell did they conduct elections, or even try to impose a precedent on the Afghan people, have so much invested in the Afghan army, the Afghan air force, so on and so forth. So I think the US will continue to face a barrage of uncomfortable questions about the entire charade of conflict negotiations and peace building. In fact, just if your goal is only about bringing down a dictator, or bringing down a fundamentalist government, then that's the same thing that is happening in Libya or Syria, or uh, the other parts of the neighborhood. So I think US was much more invested in Afghanistan. There is no denying it. And Joe Biden saying the contrary right now has led to quite a bit of raised eyebrows around the world. Now, the thing, again, Mohal, you and I were talking about this, is that
Mhm.
he mentioned that our intention was only to carry out counter-terrorist operations. CT and not counterinsurgency CI, which I kind of get. After all, they categorized Al Qaeda and Taliban as terror organizations, but
Hmm.
not as insurgency groups, which is kind of okay. But then the manner in which they had to shut shop and leave again leads to many more questions than answers.
Yeah, I mean, that's the whole problem of the war, that they started out with a counter-terrorism objective, but
Mhm.
once they caught in counterinsurgency, it was a never-ending battle, because unless you
Mohan,
attack the
right?
attack the safe havens across the border with Pakistan, it's never going to work out well. So I think, like, even in some reports I was reading in a fantastic book called Directorate S by Steve Cole, I mean, there were reports that the Al Qaeda was pretty much finished um, in Afghanistan by, I think, December of 2002 or late 2002. So
Mhm.
the goal was, like, if they wanted to get out, I mean, it's a quite a bit of messy rollout. I mean, if the time was either to get out, okay, maybe in late 2001 or 2002 when the Al Qaeda was finished, or maybe in 2011, even like a decade later, and 10 years ago, that when Bin Laden was finally captured and killed. I mean,
Right.
I mean, they just stayed too long. They couldn't get any deal going with Taliban to withdraw. I mean, and they just overstayed their welcome with the local population, and it just became messy as it is today.
Yeah, yeah. The US administration also kind of took all the trouble to explain that we were in a non-combat role and just helping the Afghan National Forces whenever there were body bags coming back home. But then again, if you were only trying to support them, then support them. I mean, the naysayers will always tell, if your role was only to support them, then support them till the end and not leave them midway. Again,
Hmm.
these kind of back and forth will continue to happen. But moreover, from a domestic perspective within the US, political mudslinging with both the Democrats and the Republicans has already begun, Mohan. So both of them continue to blame each other almost on every issue, and now Afghanistan is the new issue for them. The Democrats continue to blame the Republicans for the bad deal that the Trump administration negotiated. What they think is that the deal, which was kind of signed in early 2020, also included things like freeing around 5,000 prisoners of Taliban by the Ashraf Ghani government. Obviously, the Afghan national government was never in favor of this. And I have
Hmm.
also read reports telling that the Ghani government was not even aware of this kind of a deal being made by the US government. Now, again, once that happened and then the US elections happened, and now that we have a new administration, we also see that the Biden administration now claims that it is only keeping up their end of the bargain, uh, trying to adhere to the May 1st. Was it May 1st, Mohan? May 1st,
Yeah,
2021
yeah. The May
withdrawal date?
1st withdrawal data, there could be resumption of attacks by Taliban.
Mhm. So again, you have the Democrats claiming that, see, we are only keeping up the our end of the bargain that you signed for. So that way again, this is a never-ending mudslinging between the two parties out there in the U.S. Again, the critics of the deal have alleged that it was also badly written, including vague promises of the US and its allies not being attacked by any organization on Afghan soil. So, if you want to see the outcome of the deal, the outcome of the deal actually can be verified only much, much later when there is no attack on US or any NATO allies emanating out of the Afghan soil. So I think this way it ended up becoming a sham deal for the US and for the Afghan national government.
Hmm.
Moreover, I also read somewhere in some of the articles that while the Taliban folks are now behaving, the main motto for the Taliban administration is now to ensure that the foreigners all leave and ensure that there is no bloodshed or any violence on the streets of Kabul. And in return, the Taliban will get global recognition, not only from the US and NATO, but also from the United Nations themselves. So I think that
Mm.
is the other end of the deal, or the other end of the bargain, that that Taliban is now eagerly waiting for. So I think that way the US angle is kind of extremely complex, also playing out politically within the US. Everybody knows that the US midterm polls are a year away. Quite a bit of churn can happen between now and then, but this is quite a back foot for the President Joe Biden to find himself in getting into 2022. Mohan,
Hmm.
do you
Yeah.
have anything to
Yeah.
add about the US perspective?
No, I think you covered it well there. So.
Okay, so again, we also need to look at global security, which is an interesting perspective, quite an important one. Now, everybody will now question the hasty retreat of the U.S. Not only hasty, but also a very symbolic retreat, wherein they fled out of the Bagram airbase in the middle of the night. Then within Kabul, they did not even defend the Kabul airport properly, although now they seem to be barricading it, and now it's the other extreme. They're not even letting the Afghan nationals get to the airport. So the entire intelligentsia is made to face tough questions, and questions being asked are like, how the hell did your intelligence not correctly predict that the Afghan forces would capitulate within a fortnight? And why were you always so confident, or why were you always claiming that the Afghan national forces can hold up, if not for 2 years, if not for 1 year, at least for about 6 months? So, question like, question like, is it true that you only pick intelligence reports that are favorable to your line of thinking and ignore the other kind of intelligence reports that are provided to you? These are the new kind of questions that are being asked to the US administration. In addition, again, questions like, did all your presidents take wrong decisions to stay back in Afghanistan even after your primary objective was achieved? So, again, for Barack Obama or Donald Trump or even Joe Biden, that is a question that they'll continue to face. Again, from moving on from the US, for Russia and China, they would now want to make the most of this opportune moment and come out and make their moves in the region. After all, Russia uh, might now think that now that the US is not there in Central Asia and Middle East, slowly moving back, Russia might think that this might be the right time to attack eastern Ukraine, the Donetsk region, to ensure that its hold on Crimea, which is actually struggling for drinking water, um, I mean that hold is strengthened. So I think that way you might see Russia making a move here, a move there, and testing if checking if the US is really worried or really concerned, or does it even come back and try to attack Russia back. So I think that's the kind of moves that Russia might make. On the contrary, again, Mohal, you brought this out wonderfully well. China might now think that now that the US is back in its own backyard and not poking its nose in Middle East or any of the other Asian regions, China might now start calculating and making moves to start its reunification plans of Taiwan with the mainland. So I think that way each major superpower might look at this as an opportune moment. After all, we all know that the US is agreement bound to come to the defense of South Korea, Japan, or Taiwan. But then, if even if you stand up for these countries, even if you come and try to defend, how effective will you be in thwarting the Chinese offensive? Again, how long will you stay put? How long will you stay invested in this region? So I think these are the questions that the US will need to answer. Yeah, so I think that way, also that apart, there are these traditional allies like the NATO, Australia, and possibly even India, who will now have questions on the real US commitment for global security in this region. So Quad itself, you might find Australia and India asking tough questions to the US, telling, I mean, if you're not willing to stand up, then what is the whole point of having a Quad? After all, we all know that it's not a military alliance, but at the end of the day, if you're not standing up for what you believed in, then it might all mean it might all come down to nothing. So I think that way we are at the cusp of a new beginning, or just like how you pointed out, Cold War 2.0. Although that might be a too far-fetched term right now, but at least I firmly believe that we are at the cusp of new beginning.
Mhm.
Mohal, anything else to add in terms of global
No, I
security,
think
global?
no, I think I mean we did talk about it a lot. So now let's talk to about the Indian angle. I think which many listeners would be interested in, like how does this all affect India from a
Hmm.
domestic perspective? So Kishore, you want to start?
Yeah, luckily within India, I think we have bipartisan support in terms of talking only to elected governments, and this has been the stated Indian policy for a long time since independence, and that is why any Security Council resolution on Syria, Libya, on Iran, or any such country always has India voting against the Security Council resolution. So I think that way India might want to adopt a wait and watch policy, and I somehow feel that India will want the Taliban to make its first move. After all, India would want clarity on whether Taliban would actually I'm sorry, whether Taliban would want to tie up with Pakistan-based terror groups like TTP, which you already mentioned, and also Jaish or Lashkar under the watchful eyes of the ISI. Although it is true that Taliban has never openly stated any desire to get involved in the J&K issue, at most they may have an ideological sympathy for their fellow brethren in Kashmir. But then again, we need to understand that India does not view Taliban sympathetically, and also India need to realize that Taliban, whether you like it or not, Taliban are the new masters or the new rulers of Afghanistan. Again, one thing that kind of stood out was one article that I read where I saw that the external affairs minister, the then external affairs minister, Jaswant Singh, had called the term moderate Taliban as an oxymoron. So I think that way the government or the establishment understands that Taliban can never be trusted to be moderate. So yeah, that way we need to see how things pan out. But then I will not be surprised, on the contrary, to see if there is a policy level change for India to start talks with the Taliban, but keep it under wraps for a while to begin with, and see if there is some amount of convergence happening between the Indian establishment and Taliban. And if there are any such convergence, any such common ground to cover, then probably India might openly admit that
I
they are
mean,
talking with Taliban.
there were some reports that we did open some back channel conversations with Taliban in the last 12 months, correct?
In the
Or the
last
last
12
few
months.
months.
Correct,
Yeah,
correct. And
yeah.
this was even while we continued talking with the Afghan national government. But then
Mm-hmm.
again, this is contrary to the stated policy of the establishment. So I doubt if the government will come out openly and tell that we are now talking with the Taliban and not with the
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
democratically elected government. So
Yeah.
yeah, that's the kind of limbo that India finds itself in. But
Mm-hmm.
anyway, the other thing we need to keep in mind is Taliban can make assurances, but will they be able to enforce it on their fighters? For example, we all know that majority of their fighter force are mujahideen in nature, kind of freelance fighters. So they go from one battleground to another battleground to in the other part of the world. So what happens if these fighters who were fighting for the Taliban until now, they move on and try to cross over across the LOC into Jammu and Kashmir and start fomenting trouble out here. So I think that was something that we saw in 1990 after the collapse of the Russian or after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So India will be wary of that, although now we have a far better guarded LOC, and even the LOC is now quiet. The ceasefire is in effect. So India is in a much better position now, but you cannot totally rule out the fighters acting rogue and starting a new front all by themselves.
Yeah, I mean, uh, for Taliban, I think there would be very little appetite to start a conflict with India, with which they don't even share a land border. I mean, technically, we do have a land border of 100 kilometers, but it's in POK.
Mm.
So the question is, I mean, I think if I remember correctly, even 30 years ago, they didn't like declare war with India or like were openly hostile
They
to
did
India. I
not, yeah.
think they like were least bothered about the internal affairs inside India. I mean, they might have some sympathy for their brethren in like Jammu and Kashmir, for example,
Mm.
but there was no open hostility even back then. So I would think that that would continue even then. Um, but the question is, as you rightly said, is like most of them would not be inclined to come to Jammu and Kashmir and create like more terrorism. But what about those free? I mean, I call them like freelance fighters. I mean, they might lose interest in Afghanistan and now might be looking for the next
Mm.
fertile ground to continue their jihad. Like it could be in Central Asia, it could be in Europe, it could be
Right.
against US, it could even be in Jammu and Kashmir. So Taliban might explicitly say, okay, we don't want a war with India, but if they can't control the fighters, or if maybe the ISI is controlling some of the fighters, they are definitely bound to be have some coming into POK. But the situation with like it was this won't be the same as 30 years ago. See, 30 years ago, we had uh, we had like army troops in Jammu and Kashmir due to the unsettled borders, but we didn't have that many resources to fight the militants in Kashmir. Like now, we if you keep in mind, like we have like 5 dozen battalions of Rashtriya Rifles, some
Mm.
CRPF, and to fight the terrorism. We have fenced the entire LOC and the international border. Obviously, still infiltration does take place in certain areas, but we also have ground-based sensors put in place in many areas. We have like developed our counterinsurgency tactics, which have come a long, long way since the early days of Jammu
Right.
and Kashmir, when a lot of lives were lost. So the system has been set up much better to detect and uh, eliminate many of these terrorist threats. Obviously, there could be an uptick. Maybe let's next summer or maybe the year after that, when more of these militants will try to push into. But I'm pretty sure the security establishment, including the government and the security forces, would have game planned for it and accounted for it. Obviously, there will be some flare-ups. I mean, in theory, I mean nobody can rule out another Pulwama type of attack. I mean, which
Mm.
or maybe even a smaller terrorist attack. So we'll have to watch our guard, but I don't think we'll have a repeat of the same situation that we had in the 90s. So things will be different this time around. Is like my brief point here.
Okay. So I think if we don't have anything else, probably we can wind up, Mohan.
Yeah.
Okay. So, folks, before we wind up with this episode, let's switch our focus to recommendations. Mohan, you want to talk about your recommendation for the week?
Yeah, so I was reading this fantastic book about the whole Afghan war from let's say the 2000 from 9/11 to up till 2014 when the NATO forces completed their mission in Afghanistan. It's called Directorate S and written by an American journalist, Steve Cole. And it describes the interplay between the Afghanistan government, the Pakistan government, and the US government, how they're trying to negotiate with both, and some interactions with Taliban, and how they are trying to just get a hold on the Afghanistan, which could never, because I mean they could never attack the main source. I mean even there's a schizophrenia between the U.S. administration. Well, some of them want to go hard at the Pakistanis, while others say no, no, no. They also have their internal trouble, so we can't push them because and they have like nuclear weapons, so they can't be falling into the wrong hands. So it's like a fantastic account of the 2001 to almost like 2014 time frame on how the whole war and went in that case. It's like a excellent book. I would recommend. Kishore, like, what's your recommendation for this week?
Okay. For me, the focus was on how swift the fall was and how Taliban, how well behaved Taliban were during the entire process. In fact, they mastered the they mastered media in such a way that every time one provincial capital fell, it only hastened the progress towards Kabul. And every day, people were thinking, "Oh, okay, let's, you know what, Kabul. We thought Kabul will not fall for 1 year. Let's cut it down to 9 months." And then the very next day, when one more provincial capital fell, people would now be at awe with the progress made by Taliban within 1 day. And then suddenly they would tell, "Hey, you know what? I think it's not a matter of 9 months. Kabul will now fall within 6 months." And suddenly we saw that it was all over within less than a fortnight. So I think it was more of a media fight, a perspective, a narrative that was being built all along in social media, in digital media, and also in different world capitals as much as on the ground. So I think that way Taliban had now become media savvy. Their spokespersons were all extremely well behaved and trying to put their best feet forward. I think that was the perspective that I was looking at. And I came up with one such article written by a Madhya Pradesh cadre IPS officer called Sajid Farid Shapu, who had written an article in Indian Express titled "Taliban has learned soundbite diplomacy." It kind of summed it up completely for me, wherein the media savvy spokespersons were sending deceptive signals that would appear socially and politically acceptable, whereas the organization continued to pursue their military and ideological objective on the ground. So I think that was a fascinating article for me, and I would recommend it to the listeners. Okay, so that brings us to the end of this particular topics, this particular discussion. To continue hearing about such interesting topics, you can subscribe to our channel India Rising wherever you are listening to us. If you are listening to us on YouTube, please do press the bell icon to get notifications about new episodes. If you have not left us a review, we urge you to do so as it helps other listeners like you in finding us. We would also like to hear from you if you have any suggestions on any topics that you would like us to cover. Do remember that these topics should be directly related to Indian foreign policy. Until the next time, this is Mohal and Kishore signing off.